Jerry Crasnick, ESPN senior baseball writer. He's been following this Phillies team that has been playing much better baseball, and he's here to talk a little bit more about it with us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Welcome back to the show, Jerry. How you been?
I'm good. How are you guys?
We're doing well, man. And, there's this team across the street from the winter sports teams playing at Citizens Bank Park that maybe people haven't taken notice of. But is it time that people start to pay attention to this Phillies team?
Well, I think people were probably going to pay attention to them anyway because it's a young team with some really interesting pieces. And I thought people, some people felt like this team could be a dark horse and maybe challenge for a wild card spot. But clearly the timetable is a little bit ahead of schedule. And some of these young guys are really generating some enthusiasm. So, it's a team that I think we had to pay attention to, but most people figured the arrival date would be probably next year. And it looks like they've bumped that up a little bit.
Jerry, you wrote about Jake Arrieta and that his start was a really good sign after, kind of getting off to a slow start. What do you like? What have you liked about what you've seen from Arrieta? I mean, does he look like that top of the rotation pitcher that maybe the Phillies were hoping for?
Well, it's funny because his first couple of starts, which I didn't see, the big issue was, he's not generating many swings and misses. And think about it. I mean, Alex Cobb signed late and allowed 20 hits in his first 7 innings.
Wow.
So, there is something to be said, I think, for getting in a full complement of spring training. And he was a little bit behind the curve. So, the game I saw last week was much different. He's throwing this sinker and he's burying it down and in on guys. And, he's really he's really been impressive. So, I think the one thing you can look at with Jake Arrieta is he's always going to compete. He's an intense, tough-minded guy. And, I know it's early yet, but in Chicago, the Cubs spent $126 million on Yu Darvish. And so far, the storyline is that he's fine until something happens in a game, any little bit of adversity, and he sort of has folded up, and that's the reputation he had a little bit that he's had to overcome. So I think as long as Jake Arrieta is healthy, he's good. He's a guy who is very, he's a leader type. He is the kind of guy, I think, who's going to make it easier on Nola and Pivetta and Velasquez and Eichhoff and, they're young kids. It really provides a lot of cover, and I do think it's valuable to have that veteran at the top of a rotation.
Now, when you flip to the other side, Jerry Crasnick's with us here. Rhys Hoskins has played 70 games. Your colleague Buster Olney tweeted this out in the big leagues. 22 homers, 52 runs, 67 RBI, a .422 on-base percentage, .623 slugging. My producer had told me before he asked a question, how come no one talks more about this guy, Rhys Hoskins? Are people going to start talking more? Is he the kind of guy that you think can carry a lineup?
Well, he's a huge cog in the middle of that lineup, and I think people talk about him. Look, he wasn't up that long. It's funny because in spring training, I went out to see the A's at camp, and they have this kid, Matt Olson, who I think hit 24 homers in 245 at-bats, and the storyline out in Oakland was he didn't get any publicity because everybody was talking about Rhys Hoskins, in August and September. They even had a laugh about that together. So I think people are going to really pay attention to Rhys Hoskins. But, look, there's Bryce Harper and Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani. There's certain guys, I guess, that are going to hog the attention. And the thing with Rhys Hoskins is, as good a player as he is, I think he has the kind of work ethic and personality that you can best appreciate over time. He's so steady. He's not going to pop off. He's not controversial, but his work ethic's impeccable. He has leadership skills. He's great with fans. He's terrific with the media. He checks every box, and I think he's the kind of guy that you watch him every single day, and you appreciate him even more than what you see in those numbers, which in and of themselves are extremely impressive.
Jerry, there's the phrase you just used right there, appreciate over time. That makes me think of Gabe Kapler and how he was maybe not appreciated at the beginning, specifically for lifting Aaron Nola out of that season opener. But you wrote about Gabe Kapler and his approach and how fans maybe are starting to turn the corner on him. What have you seen out of Gabe Kapler in the first month of the season?
Well, look, the one thing when I sat down with Gabe, I think there were two things that he wanted me to know, that number one, he's not just a stat head. He's a guy who played 12 years in the big leagues. He was a big prospect at one point. He was a guy who was sent down in the middle of a contract. He was traded. He was a bench player on a world championship team. He kind of ran the gamut of experiences, and I think he really does feel a connection and a kinship with the players in the clubhouse. That's why he's big in terms of communicating with them on when they're going to have days off. And, you notice he's very careful what he says in the media. He's not a ripper. I mean, he said, my inclination is I'm always going to say something good about somebody. So it might frustrate the media a little bit because it can be boring at times or whatever, but it endears him, I think, to the players in his clubhouse. And the other thing he said was, look, I'll make mistakes, but I'm not going to make the same mistake twice, or at least he's going to try to avoid that. And, I think that's the thing about him. He's very curious. He's willing to change. I think he's flexible. I think he does listen to his coaches. And look, 20 games is a pretty small sample size, but I think given how badly things started, that's a pretty impressive recovery that he's made, to this point.
Yeah, you talk about learning from your mistakes. Do you think he actually learned something or took something away from that awful day there where he tried to get Hobie Milner into the game and Hobie hadn't even taken off his warm-up coat yet, and then he got chastised by the umpiring crew in Major League Baseball?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, though. I think Aaron Boone had a very similar experience in spring training where Dellin Betances was already in the clubhouse, and I think it was Adam Warren wasn't warmed up, so they had to go get the pitcher out of the clubhouse to come back out because the other guy wasn't warmed up. I saw Alex Cora, who's 17-4, said that he got caught up in the enthusiasm so much during a Red Sox victory that he forgot to make a defensive replacement. When you're a first-time manager and you haven't done this, there are some things that are going to fall through the cracks. So, the one point that Gabe and Matt Klentek and people made were if he did that in the middle of the season, people would make fun of it or whatever. But when you do all this stuff in the first 3 days, you don't have anything to compare it to. And I think that magnified it in the public eye.
Jerry Crasnick's with us, ESPN.com senior baseball writer here. And, Jerry, this team spent some money in the offseason. You wrote about this at ESPN.com. They brought in Arrieta, the Carlos Santana. They brought in some guys, Hunter, who the guys they've signed really haven't helped. You figure, other than Arrieta, really. But, Hunter has just got off the DL. Neshek's not activated yet. Santana's hitting, 151? This team could actually play some better baseball down the road here.
Yeah, you look at that, and you're right. They haven't gotten much out of, if anything, out of the free agent guys. I think Santana has just hit into some bad luck. You look at that. I just did a story on the Indians, and these pretty small sample sizes. You hit 8 or 10 line drives at people in the first 3 weeks, and that really tempers your batting average. So Santana does give them something. He gives them a guy who works counts. He's very patient. He'll draw walks. He's a real professional hitter. So I think he's going to pay dividends. You hope that Hunter and Neshek can really settle in and be stabilizing influences in that bullpen, but they've gotten some pretty good work out of a bunch of other guys so far. So you're right. I think we'll see what happens. The other thing is Gabe's had to sort of be very dexterous with his lineup cards. Every day he's got a couple guys who might not be happy because they're not playing, and at some point they'll get a couple injuries, and they'll probably wish they'll be glad for that because they are going to encounter some of that stuff. They've been pretty fortunate, except for the bullpen guys. They've been relatively healthy so far. So that's another thing that's going to test them, I think, as the season goes on. And then as the expectations rise, and people start to talk about them as a playoff team, well, if that's the case, after the All-Star break, will they make any moves? And, how will they handle that stretch drive as a very young team?
Yeah, that's for sure. We'll see if the Phillies are hanging around at the All-Star break, which right now, the second-best record in the National League behind the Diamondbacks and Mets for that spot. And, one thing that I like, Jerry, you talk about in this analytic world that we live in especially in baseball now, and Kapler specifically is up there, the fact that this team works the count. They take a lot of pitches, and to me that's the sign of a good baseball team. A team at the end of the year that is typically a good team is going to be winning in that category.
Yeah, and I think that's the kind of thing where you really have to seek those players out. I mean, you can't get a free swinger guy and have him come in and say, hey, be patient and work the count. But, Santana fit that description. I think some of these other guys like Hoskins and Kingery, when they work their way up through the minors and they draft and develop these guys, that's a trait that you see when you first sign these guys or develop them. So, they certainly have a plan in that direction, and they do have that ability. And, sometimes I'm not sure how beneficial it is, because these bullpens are pretty deep, and if you get into the bullpen in the 6th or 7th, you might be facing a lot of good matchups. But so far, it's really worked out well for them.
And Jerry, he's been giving his pitchers more rope. The pitchers have responded at 2.38 ERA, a .98 WHIP over the last 12 games. They really responded.
Yeah, I think there was a bit of alarmism early where people said, oh, God, he's going to be lifting everybody after 60 pitches. And, Gabe told me, he said, look, it wasn't like we thought Nola would do 100 in his first 3 appearances. We wanted to build up for that. And I think they felt like, hey, we'll do 70, then we'll do 85, then we'll do 100. The one thing is you don't want to be lifting guys too early, because who knows, the next night your starter might get shelled and give you 2 innings, and then all of a sudden you're really wearing out your bullpen. So I think he's developing a feel for that. And, the other thing is he's got a good coaching staff. I mean, John Maley and Rick Kranitz and, Rob Thompson, the bench coach, is a guy that the Yankees loved. I mean, they were upset to lose that guy. So I think he's getting some good support from the front office and from a good coaching staff, and that's helping to ease his transition too.
Major League Baseball writer, senior baseball writer at ESPN.com, Jerry Crasnick with us here. Check out his piece on Jake Arrieta and also his sit-down long-form piece on Gabe Kapler and the Phillies at ESPN.com. Jerry, thanks so much, pal.
Thank you, guys.